Hey guys, welcome back to this troubleshooting in Salesforce issues. As a part of today's video, we'll be understanding how can we troubleshoot a common issue that the developers would face. We'll see the issue first and then we'll understand how can we better debug this issue. I'm on my case tab. I'm creating a new case record from the UI. I'll just populate all the required fields here. And once done, I'll click on save. If you see here, we are getting a too many SOQL query 101 error. So this is a common error that the developers would get in case if we are using more than what has been given to us. In terms of kernel limits, there is a limit on number of SOQL queries that we can use in a transaction, that is 100. As of now, in this scenario, we are exceeding that limit. We are asking the Salesforce to give us extra queries that is not intended as part of our kernel limit. Now let's understand how can we debug this one. Whenever you are facing such issue, a tool that can help you out troubleshoot this issue is nothing but your debug logs. I have my developer console open here. Let's reproduce this issue so that way we can capture our debug logs under this logs tab. In case if you want to capture it from the debug logs from the setup, feel free to do that as well. Click on setup, search for debug log, and once the page loads, set up a user for which you want to capture the debug logs for. In my case, my logged in user is the one who will be reproducing it. So I'll be setting up a log for that particular user. Once you are able to reproduce the issue, you will be finding the debug logs here. For the simplicity of this debugging, I'll not set up a debug log from here, but I'll use a debug log generated from my developer console. So let's reproduce that issue once more. Click on new, fill all the required fields and click on save. So again, I see the same error. So now if I go to my developer console, I should be seeing a debug log here, which says too many SOQL query 101. So I'll open this debug log. And if you see here, too many SOQL query 101, and this is the debug log for it. So if I scroll down to the end, that is where I'll get to know the kernel limits that are being used and where exactly the error is. So if you see here, the number of SOQL queries that are given for a transaction is 100, but I'm asking the system to give me 101 SOQL queries. So that is where it is throwing me an error saying that too many SOQL 101. We know one thing from this debug log and from the error, that means we are asking the Salesforce to execute more than 100 SOQL queries. But how can we get to know which queries are being used? Right? In order to troubleshoot this one, we need to identify what all queries are being executed as a part of this transaction. So you can go ahead and check the debug log one by one and see where is the query that is being used. So if you see here, there is one query that has been used here, there is a second one, and so on and so forth. It is really difficult to keep a track of where all these queries are being used and what is that query, what is the reason why these queries are executed those many number of times. In case if you are having a trouble like this, that is where our trick comes into picture. Now what you can do is you can right click on this debug log that we have generated and then click on open raw log. Now what it would do is it would basically open the same debug log in a raw mode where you can go ahead and copy the content of the debug log that has been generated. So I've copied this entire debug log. What I'll do this time is I'll go ahead and open my VS Code and paste the debug log that has been generated. So what I've done here is I've opened a VS Code. In a couple of seconds from now, you'll understand the reason why I've done that. So here is my entire debug log, nothing new that we are looking at. We have looked at the same debug log from our developer console also. Now, how can we better troubleshoot this kind of an issues where you have an SOQL query that is where you have an SOQL query error 101, right? So the intent behind this troubleshooting is to identify which queries are being executed and how many times they are executed. So once you have your debug log open, look for this line which says SOQL execute begin. Copy this line. We wanted to remove all the queries from this debug log, paste them separately and look at them individually. That is the intent behind doing this in our VS Code. We could have done the same thing in our developer console also. It is a little bit difficult to keep a track of things when you have to scroll down in your developer console. That is why we have moved to VS Code. I'll copy this section which says SOQL execute begin. I'll copy this one and I'll search it in this file. So if I search it in the file, it comes up to 101, which is matching with the error that we have seen earlier. Now, how can I identify all the queries in this debug log and then start looking into the actual root cause? That is where you can use this technique, which is do a copy of this line, search for all the instances. If you're on Windows, do Control-Shift-L. What it does is it would highlight all the lines which are matching with this phrase. Control-Shift-L if you're on Windows. If you're on Mac, use Command-Shift-L. So once that is done, close this find section. You can either use escape or you can use a cross sign in that pop-up section. Once that is done, do a Control-L on your Windows. What it would do is it would select the entire line that we have. If you're on Mac, by now you might have guessed it, you need to hit Command-L. So once that is done, we do not want the extra space to be counted here. Press and hold your shift and use the left-hand side arrow key so that you do not copy the extra space that is at the end of this line. Now, once that is done, we are good with all the selections that are with this phrase called SOQL execution begin. Do a Control-C if you're on Windows, Command-C if you're on Mac. Then open a new window or a new tab in your VS Code and paste them using your Control-V or Command-V according to the OS that you're using. Now, if you see here, what we have done is we were able to isolate all the SOQL query that are being used in the transaction in a separate file. Now, what we need to do? First thing that you can check is scroll down and check for the count on the file. So it is using 101 SOQL query. That is also a confirmation that you have copied everything. The next thing is to identify which queries are being repeated. Now, what I would do is I would pick up the first query and start searching for it. This is the entire query that I have. I start searching for it. If you see here, it is occurring 30 times. And that too, it is happening. There is no pattern as such. It is repeating after every line for 30 times. So I'll take a note of it. So somewhere this query is being repeated 30 times. So what I would do, I will open a new notepad or a tab in our VS Code, and I'll mention the query that has been repeated 30 times. And I'll also make sure that I'll copy this line. Why? Because this gives me an indicator that on which line it is basically coming up. For time being, I've just parked this information on a new notepad. I'll go back and do this process once again. So out of 101 queries that are being used, we got to know how many queries that are being consumed at this point of time, which is 30. Now I'll do the same analysis for the another query that I have, which is select ID, first name from contact. Clearly, again, it is also something that has been repeated. So from line number 31 to line number 60, again, 30 queries are being used, and the same query is being repeated multiple times. This is also a hint for us for next troubleshooting that we need to do. Right, so I've pasted them on a separate window again. We got a tally of 60 queries that are being used, and rest is 41 queries that we need to figure out. I'll do the same analysis again. So if you see here, again, a query is being repeated for 41 times, which is ideally adding up to 101 queries that we have used as a part of this transaction. Same thing, copy this content into a new sheet that you have set up. So now if you see 30 queries here, 30, another 30 is here, another 41 is here. So total is 30 plus 41, which is ideally 101. So we have understood that there are 3 queries that are being repeated, which is adding up to the total. Our next step is to understand why is it happening so. Is it because of a requirement that is happening, or what exactly is the reason why the query is being repeated 30 times? Now we need to figure that out. So what we need to do is copy the first query, go back to your actual debug log that has been generated. Not the debug log where we have just sorted, where we have only copied the queries, but to the actual debug log that we have initially started off with. Search for that query. So this is the first instance of that query, and it is on line number 5. So let's scroll a little up, keep scrolling up till the point where you understand that there is a trigger or a class which is having this reference. So the idea here is to identify where is this query being used. So I'll scroll up till the point where I see something that I can start looking into. At this point of time, I still don't see anything, but now here is a hint for me. A trigger on case, and that one before insert is where the code is actually starting. So now we got some hint in terms of understanding where is this query being used. Let's go back to our org to identify what exactly we have in that particular trigger. So let's go ahead and open that trigger, click on file, open trigger, and we have a case trigger on which the query is there. I'll open that case trigger, and as soon as I open this trigger, I can clearly see that there is a query inside my for loop. So this is one hint to understand that there is something that is wrong in this trigger. So if you see here, there is a for loop that is running for 30 times. Inside that for loop, there is a query that is being executing. So if I go back and check the VS code, the query, if you look at the query, this is where it is actually there. So which is matching with our query that we have seen on our code also. On which line number it is? It is on line number 5. Let's go ahead and check that also. On line number 5, there is a query which is matching with what we have seen, and it is running for 30 times. So this is one place that we need to kind of modify. This is something a big no-no in terms of using a query inside your for loop. That is a big mistake. We need to correct this one. So this is our first flag, red flag here. So we have understood that there is something that needs to be looked at for this particular line. I've just commented out saying that first red flag, right? So this is something that we need to look at. So we got to know what is happening here for the first 30 queries, but we have not figured out the entire list of queries that are being used. So now what is happening, once the record is being inserted, the trigger is firing inside your before insert. This section is being completed. That is why you get to know the 30 record count. After that, what is happening? Your after insert fires, and we are inserting an account record. So from this one, what I can get to know, there is an account record that has been inserted. Now what I'll do, I'll again go back to my debug log to find out where is this DML. OP colon insert. I'll search for this one, OP insert. As soon as I do that, I'll get to know the DML that has been used of type insert, and on which record it has been inserted on. It is inserting an account record. This is another clue to understand what is happening after that 30 queries that are being executed. If you see, as soon as this insert is happening, there is an account trigger that is running. Let's scroll down a little bit to see what is there in here. And if you see, I can quickly identify there is a query that I have copy pasted in my new notepad, which is this one. Select ID comma first name from contact, which is matching with the query that we have parked aside. There are 30 SOQL queries which are going with the same format. That means there is something that is also fishy on this particular line. And I can also see that line number 4 is being repeated 30 times. So there is a high chances that again I'm suspecting there is a query that has been written inside my for loop. Let's go ahead and check that. Our clue is account trigger is executing after this section. So let's open account trigger. Again, you can do the same process. I have my account trigger here. I'll open this one. So as soon as I open that account trigger, again, I see that similar pattern. The same query is being written inside my for loop, that too for 30 times. And this query is being iterating for 30 times. Again, this is a second red flag that we can show in terms of best practices. So we got to know 60 queries that are being consumed in this transaction. Let's understand what is happening next. After an account trigger, before insert trigger is running, after that we have our after insert trigger running. What it is doing? It is basically creating a contact and it is using the account ID that is being created here. So that means there is again an insert that is happening on a contact. Ideally, if there is a trigger on contact, it should run that. Let's look at what is there in for this contact trigger. Let's go back to our debug log and understand what is happening there. So this time I'm doing the same approach, op:insert, and I'll search for next. First record was of account, and the second insert that we have in this debug log is for contact. If there is another DML, feel free to search for op: that particular DML. If it is an update, search for op: update. So that way you'll be able to find out what is happening. So as soon as there is an insert that is there, a contact trigger is firing. That too before insert. If I scroll down a bit, all the assignments that are there on the trigger are being shown here. So we are looking for a specific query that is nothing but select ID, name, industry from account. So this is the same query that we have written here. In case if you have a difficulty identifying where is that query, what you can do is you can copy your query, look at the DML where exactly it is. The DML is on line number 858. Now paste your query and look at the line where this query is matching. So we have our DML at 858, which is this line. After that, there is a query that has been repeated at line number 890. So this is also repeating for 41 times. Let's look at this clue that we have, which is nothing but contact trigger that we have. Let's go back to our Salesforce org and see what is there on the contact trigger. If you look at this contact trigger, feel free to open it from file and then say open from, select the triggers here and open the contact trigger here. So I have the contact trigger already open. Again, if you see, there are some assignments that are happening for the list of contact records that are being created. And once that is done, I'm iterating over this for loop for 41 times, which is the reason why the query is being used for 41 times as part of our findings that we have noted down in our notepad. If you see, 41 times it is going on. So this is how you can troubleshoot your SOQL queries and fix them accordingly. Third red flag. So as a part of best practices, never put your query inside your for loop. The reason for that is, even though your code would be working for a single record, if there are n number of records that are being inserted as a part of your data load, that is where your query count increases. So never ever put your query inside your for loop. Let's quickly test so let's quickly fix this one and let's see what would happen. So I do not want a query to be written inside this for loop. I've just done that to show you how we can replicate this issue. So I'll comment out this section because this is something that I do not want, which is also not a good practice. In case if you have to use your query inside your for loop, feel free to build a map and then use that map for your next operations. So I've commented it out in the case trigger. I'll do the same thing in our account trigger also. And finally, I'll do the same thing for our contact trigger. So I'm just commenting out this section using my multi-line comment. Once the changes are done, let's go ahead and create this record once again and see what would happen. So our latest changes are in. This time I'll click on new and do the same field population. Fill out all the required fields. Once done, click on save. So now if you see our case got successfully created, let's look at the debug log that has been generated. This time we are not seeing too many SOQL queries and we see a success message also. If I open this debug log and scroll down to the end of this debug log, that is where I'll get to know how many SOQL queries are being consumed. If you see here in this entire transaction, since I've commented out all the SOQLs, I see 0 number of SOQLs are being consumed, whereas I'm using 2 DMLs which is for inserting an account and a contact. So that is how you debug this error, which is nothing but too many SOQL query 101. So I've given you a step-by-step process on how exactly you can identify those queries and how to sort them out, and then search for those queries in your actual debug log to find out where it is being used. Open that particular component, be it your trigger class, open that, check where is it being used, and then accordingly make the changes to resolve this issue. In case if there is no query that is being repeated, then there is a high chance that you need to move your code to an asynchronous mode of execution, so that way you can get that extra SOQL queries to avoid such errors in the future. That is all for this video. Thanks for joining in. In case if you like this video, do like, share, and subscribe to our channel SFDC Quest. And let us know in the comment section which troubleshooting you want next. Thank you. Hey guys, if you like this video, do like, share, and subscribe to SFDC Quest.